Welcome back to the channel, everyone. It's great to have you here as we dive into one of the most fascinating and controversial stories in the world of rare coins, a story that has captured the imagination of collectors, historians, and everyday people alike, the tale of a 1972 one-cent coin that has been rumored, discussed, and debated as being worth as much as $113 million. An amount so shocking that it instantly raises questions about how a simple penny could ever reach such a staggering valuation, and that is exactly what we are going to explore together today, not as a guaranteed fact carved in stone, but as an exploration of the extraordinary errors, mistakes, and rare possibilities that, if combined in a single authentic example, could theoretically elevate a humble copper cent into the realm of legendary treasures. To understand this, we first need to appreciate that coin values are not only driven by age or face value but by rarity, condition, demand, and most importantly for this story, minting errors that escape detection and destruction, because in 1972 the United States Mint was producing hundreds of millions of cents, relying on high-speed machinery that, while efficient, was not immune to human oversight, mechanical failure, or transitional confusion between dyes, metals, and design elements. And this environment is precisely where extraordinary mistakes can be born. One of the most discussed possibilities surrounding an ultra-valuable 1972 cent involves dramatic double die errors, where the design elements such as the date, lettering, and Lincoln's portrait appear clearly doubled due to misalignment during the die creation process. And while standard double die cents from 1972 already command impressive prices, the hypothetical coin that fuels the $113 million valuation would need to show an extreme, unmistakable doubling across nearly every design element, far beyond what is commonly seen, combined with razor-sharp detail and pristine preservation, because condition is everything, and a coin with massive errors, but heavyware would never reach mythical value levels. Another layer of intrigue comes from the possibility of a wrong planchet error, meaning the coin was struck on a metal blank intended for an entirely different denomination or even a different country, such as being struck on a silver planchet, an aluminum experimental blank, or a foreign alloy never meant for U.S. cents. And while such errors are known to exist in other years, the idea of a 1972 cent struck on an extremely rare or undocumented planchet would instantly place it among the rarest mint mistakes imaginable, especially if metallurgical testing confirmed the metal composition to be something never officially authorized for circulation, turning the coin into a unique artifact rather than just a collectible. Adding to this is the potential for an off-metal and off-center strike combined in a single piece, where the design is dramatically misaligned, portions of the coin are missing, and yet the date and mint details remain visible enough to authenticate it, because paradoxically, the more visually dramatic and clearly accidental the error is, the more desirable it can become to collectors who specialize in mint anomalies. And if such an error occurred alongside other anomalies, like a broad strike without a collar or multiple overlapping strikes, the coin would represent a perfect storm of mistakes that should never have survived quality control. Another factor often discussed in these high-value scenarios is the possibility of a transitional error, where leftover materials or dyes from previous or experimental runs were mistakenly used during regular production. And while 1972 is not widely known as a major transition year for cents, the existence of experimental alloys tested in the late 1960s and early 1970s opens the door to speculation that a small number of test planchets could have been accidentally fed into the presses, and if a 1972 cent were proven to be struck on one of these undocumented experimental metals, especially if only a single example is known, its value would not be constrained by price guides or auction history, but by what elite collectors and institutions are willing to pay to own a one-of-a-kind piece of monetary history. Beyond physical errors, provenance plays a massive role in pushing a coin's value into the stratosphere, because a 1972 cent discovered in an ordinary Pocket might be interesting, but one accompanied by a verifiable chain of ownership, mint documentation, or historical context suggesting it was known but quietly retained by a mint employee or researcher could elevate its significance dramatically, especially if that documentation supports claims that the coin represents a mistake that prompted internal reviews or changes in minting procedures, turning the coin into a symbol of a pivotal moment in U.S. mint history rather than just a curiosity. Authentication is another critical pillar in the $113 million discussion because for any coin to even be considered at that level, it would need to be examined, certified, and debated by multiple top-tier grading and authentication services, with extensive testing including microscopy, dye analysis, metal composition studies, and comparison to known genuine examples. And the very process of authentication can itself increase a coin's fame and perceived value, as controversy and debate often drive demand just as much as certainty, especially when the coin challenges established assumptions about what is possible. Market psychology cannot be ignored either, because ultra-wealthy collectors often seek not just rare objects but stories, and a 1972 cent that embodies a cascade of minting failures, historical mystery, and near-mythical status would be far more than a coin. It would be a narrative, a conversation piece, and a symbol of owning something no one else can, and in such cases the final price is not determined by metal content or even traditional rarity metrics, but by competitive desire among buyers who view the purchase as a legacy investment. It is also important to understand that figures like $113 million often emerge from theoretical valuations rather than completed sales, representing what experts speculate a coin could command under perfect conditions in a private sale between billionaires or institutions, rather than what has definitively changed hands at public auction. And this distinction matters because it highlights the role of possibility rather than certainty, a key theme in the world of legendary era coins. Even the smallest overlooked detail, such as a unique die crack pattern, an unknown mint mark anomaly, or microscopic evidence of multiple die states on a single strike, could tip the balance from merely rare to utterly unparalleled. And collectors who specialize in era coins know that these subtle clues often tell the true story of how a mistake occurred and why it survived. Ultimately, the fascination with a 1972 1 cent rumored to be worth $113 million lies not in a guarantee of riches, but in the reminder that even the most ordinary objects can become extraordinary through a combination of human error, historical circumstance, and collector passion. And while most 1972 pennies are worth only a cent or slightly more, the idea that one could exist with such a perfect convergence of mistakes keeps people checking their change, searching old collections, and learning about numismatics, which is perhaps the greatest value of all, because it turns curiosity into knowledge and history into something tangible you can hold in your hand. And as long as there is even a remote possibility that such a coin exists, the story will continue to inspire debate, discovery, and wonder among collectors around the world. Next, 1970 1 cent USA coin. In today's journey, we are talking about one of the most mysterious and conversation-starting Lincoln cents ever discussed among collectors, the 1970 1 cent, a coin that on the surface looks ordinary, something millions of people have handled without a second thought. Yet beneath that copper exterior lies a combination of errors, minting anomalies, historical circumstances, and theoretical possibilities that have fueled claims, debates, and legends, placing its potential value as high as $86 million, a number so shocking that it instantly captures attention and invites skepticism, curiosity, and excitement all at once. And that is exactly why this coin continues to dominate discussions in numismatic circles and speculative collector communities, because the 1970 cent sits at a crossroads of transitional minting technology, human error, material experimentation, and microscopic imperfections that, when aligned in extreme and rare ways, can transform a 1 cent coin into an object of unimaginable worth. And to understand how such a valuation is even possible, we must step into the era itself, the late 1960s and early 1970s, a period when the United States Mint was still adjusting to the aftermath of the Great Metal Composition Change of 1962 and the complete elimination of silver from circulating coinage by 1965. When production demands were massive, machinery was aging, and quality control was often sacrificed for speed. Especially at the Denver Mint, where the 1970 cent was struck in enormous quantities to satisfy nationwide circulation needs, and it is precisely during high-volume production that the most dramatic and valuable mistakes can occur, mistakes that escape detection and enter circulation where they wait silently for decades until someone notices something just slightly off. And the 1970 cent is famous for being a playground of such abnormalities, starting with one of the most discussed possibilities, the double die obverse phenomenon, where the coin die itself was misaligned during the hubbing process, causing the design elements to be impressed twice at slightly different angles, resulting in visible doubling on the date, the word liberty, and the motto "In God We Trust." And while many minor double dies exist, the extreme examples are the ones that ignite multi-million-dollar valuations, particularly when the doubling is bold, well separated, and present across multiple design elements, because such coins are not only visually striking but scientifically fascinating as physical records of mechanical misalignment frozen in copper. And when a 1970 cent exhibits dramatic doubling combined with other rare features, its desirability multiplies exponentially rather than incrementally. And then there is the issue of off-metal strikes, a category that alone can propel a common date cent into legendary status, because during transitional years the Mint often handled multiple planchet types simultaneously, including copper alloy test blanks, foreign coin planchets, and experimental metals. And if a 1970 cent were struck on an incorrect planchet, such as a bronze alloy intended for another denomination, or a foreign copper-based blank with a different weight and thickness, the resulting coin would immediately stand apart under precise measurement. And when confirmed by metallurgical analysis, such a piece becomes not just a coin, but a documented mint error artifact. And if that off-metal strike also carries additional anomalies like doubling or die cracks, its value can leap into speculative territory that supports eight-figure discussions, especially when collectors compete not only for ownership but for the prestige of possessing something unique or nearly unique. And uniqueness is a powerful force in numismatics, because unlike mass-produced items, a singular error cannot be replicated once the circumstances that created it are gone. And this brings us to one of the most controversial possibilities tied to the 1970 cent, the alleged existence of transitional alloy errors involving experimental copper compositions. Since the Mint was quietly testing alternative metals due to rising copper prices even before the officially documented aluminum cent experiments of the early 1970s. And if a 1970 cent were proven to be struck on a prototype alloy never intended for circulation, it would represent a missing link in Mint history, a coin that fills a gap in the official record and challenges what we think we know about Mint operations. And history-correcting artifacts often carry astronomical valuations because museums, private foundations, and elite collectors are willing to pay extraordinary sums to own something that rewrites established narratives. And beyond alloy issues, there are striking errors that play a massive role in elevating this coin's perceived worth, including extreme off-center strikes where the design is dramatically shifted yet still retains a visible date and mint mark, because such pieces demonstrate a complete breakdown in the alignment process, and when combined with a clean uncirculated surface, the visual impact alone can justify 6- or 7-figure auction results. And then we move into the realm of multiple strike errors, where a coin was struck more than once without being properly ejected, resulting in overlapping images, rotated designs, or ghostly impressions that look almost surreal. And these coins capture attention not only from collectors, but from the general public because they look like something impossible, something that should not exist, and impossibility is a powerful driver of value, and another layer of intrigue is added by die cracks, die breaks, and retained cut errors, where the die itself was breaking apart under pressure, leaving raised lines, blobs, or missing sections on the coin. And while small die cracks are common, massive retained cuts that alter the portrait or date dramatically are exceptionally rare. And when such a dramatic die failure occurs early in a die's life and produces only a handful of coins before the die is retired, those few survivors become instant legends. And if one of those survivors happens to be a 1970 D cent in pristine condition, the value calculation shifts from typical market logic into prestige economics, where ownership confers status beyond monetary measurement. And speaking of condition, grade plays an enormous role in supporting claims of extreme valuation, because a coin with multiple rare errors, but heavyware, will never command the same attention as one preserved in mint state with full original luster, sharp details, and minimal contact marks. And when collectors imagine an $86,001,970 D cent, they are envisioning a virtually flawless specimen, one that somehow avoided circulation entirely, perhaps pulled directly from a mint roll by an observant individual, or stored away unknowingly for decades, protected from environmental damage, oxidation, or handling wear. And the survival of such a coin borders on miraculous, which only adds to its mystique. And beyond physical errors, there is the psychological factor of narrative, because coins become more valuable when they carry a compelling story, and the 1970 D cent story is intertwined with economic uncertainty, rising metal prices, technological transition, and human imperfection, making it a symbol of an era rather than just a denomination. And when a specific specimen can be linked to a particular batch, press, or moment in mint history, its story becomes richer and its appeal broader, attracting interest from historians, investors, and institutions. And this is where speculative valuations often emerge, because while the typical market price for a standard 1970 D cent remains modest, the hypothetical convergence of multiple ultra-rare attributes in a single coin creates a scenario where traditional price guides no longer apply, and instead value is determined by negotiation among elite buyers, private sales, and behind closed doors transactions where numbers are influenced by emotion, competition, and legacy rather than catalog listings. And there is also the element of discovery yet to be made, because millions of 1970 D cents still exist in collections, jars, and inherited hoards, and the possibility that an undiscovered extraordinary error remains hidden fuels ongoing excitement, prompting collectors to re-examine old coins with new technology, microscopes, and digital imaging tools that can reveal subtle anomalies previously overlooked. And every time a new major error is authenticated, it reinforces the belief that something even bigger might still be out there, and this belief sustains the narrative of extreme value. And we cannot ignore the influence of modern media and viral storytelling in amplifying such claims, because when a coin is discussed in terms of tens of millions, it captures public imagination, draws new collectors into the hobby, and creates a feedback loop where attention itself adds perceived value. And while skeptics rightly question whether any 1970 D cent has actually sold for $86 million, the more important point is that numismatics has always included aspirational valuations, coins whose theoretical worth reflects their potential impact rather than documented sales. And history shows that today's speculation can become tomorrow's reality when the right coin meets the right buyer at the right moment. And examples like the 1943 copper cent and the 1955 double-die penny demonstrate that coins once dismissed or misunderstood can eventually command life-changing sums. And the 1970 D cent sits comfortably within this tradition of underestimated anomalies waiting for their moment. And when collectors speak of $86 million, they are expressing not just a price but a belief in rarity, significance, and possibility, a belief that somewhere out there exists a 1970 D cent so profoundly wrong yet so perfectly preserved that it transcends its denomination and becomes a singular artifact of American minting history. And this belief keeps collectors searching, learning, and sharing knowledge, which is ultimately what keeps the hobby alive and evolving. And as we reflect on the errors, mistakes, and possibilities that surround the 1970 D1 cent, from doubled dies and off-metal strikes to dramatic die failures and experimental alloys, we see that its legendary value is not rooted in fantasy alone, but in the real and documented capacity of the mint to produce extraordinary mistakes under ordinary circumstances. Mistakes that, when aligned with rarity, condition, and story, can elevate a humble penny into the realm of priceless treasure. And that is why the 1970 D cent continues to inspire debate, excitement, and hope, reminding us that even the smallest coin can carry the weight of history and the promise of unimaginable worth. And as long as people continue to look closely, question assumptions, and appreciate the beauty of imperfection, the legend of the $86,001,970 D1 cent will continue to grow, evolve, and perhaps one day be proven beyond doubt. Next, 2000 D1 cent USA coin. Thank you for being here today, because once again, we are diving into the hidden world of American coins where ordinary pocket change can secretly carry extraordinary value. And today's story is one that continues to shock collectors, spark debates, and inspire millions of people to recheck their jars, rolls, and old collections, because we are talking about the 2000 D1 cent, a coin most people remember casually from the turn of the millennium, a time filled with excitement, uncertainty, and massive production at the United States Mint. Yet almost nobody imagined that this small copper-colored coin from the Denver Mint could ever be connected to discussions of $40 million. And yet here we are, exploring how a single cent struck in the year 2000 could theoretically reach such a staggering valuation because of a rare convergence of minting errors, mechanical mistakes, transitional anomalies, experimental possibilities, and historical context that together elevate this coin far beyond its face value and even beyond typical collector pricing. And to truly understand why the 2000 D1 cent holds such legendary status in speculative numismatics, we must first step back into the environment of its creation, because the year 2000 was not just another date on the calendar, it was the beginning of a new millennium. And the United States Mint was under enormous pressure to produce massive quantities of coins to meet circulation demands, collector interest, and commemorative enthusiasm, all while operating aging equipment, transitioning technologies, and maintaining speed over perfection, particularly at the Denver Mint, which struck billions of Lincoln cents during this period. And whenever volume increases, the probability of errors escaping quality control rises dramatically, creating the perfect storm for rare mistakes to slip into circulation unnoticed. And the 2000 D cent sits at the center of this storm, quietly carrying the potential for extraordinary anomalies, starting with one of the most powerful value drivers in modern coin collecting, the double die error, because during the die creation process, if the hub impresses the design onto the die more than once at slightly different positions, the resulting die will produce coins with visible doubling on design elements. And while minor doubling is relatively common and often dismissed as machine doubling, true hub double dies are rare and highly prized. And for the 2000 D cent, the most talked about possibilities involve dramatic doubling on the date, the word liberty, Lincoln's iron beard, and the motto "In God We Trust." And when such doubling is strong, rounded, and clearly separated, it is considered authentic hub doubling rather than flat shelf like machine doubling. And this distinction is critical because authentic double dies represent permanent die errors that produce multiple coins. Yet extreme examples may only survive in very small numbers, especially if discovered late or overlooked during circulation. And when collectors imagine a $40 million $2,000 D cent, they are often envisioning an extreme double die example combined with other rare characteristics, because value in numismatics grows exponentially when errors stack rather than simply add. And beyond double dies, the year 2000 is especially fascinating because it falls within a period of ongoing experimentation with planchets, metals, and sourcing, as copper prices fluctuated, and the mint relied heavily on zinc core planchets plated with copper, and during such times the possibility of off-metal strikes becomes a central talking point, because if a 2000 D cent were accidentally struck on a planchet intended for another denomination, such as a dime, a foreign coin, or even an experimental blank never meant for public release, the result would be a coin with incorrect weight, thickness, and acoustic properties, immediately identifiable through precise testing, and confirmed off-metal errors from modern eras are exceptionally rare because of improved controls, which paradoxically makes any genuine example even more valuable. And if a 2000 D cent were proven to be struck on an experimental alloy or transitional planchet, it would instantly become a centerpiece of American numismatic history, not merely a collectible but a documented artifact of mint operations. And such artifacts often transcend traditional market pricing because they attract institutional interest from museums, historical foundations, and elite collectors who compete not just with money but with prestige and legacy in mind. And then there is the matter of missing or malformed mint marks, because the Denver mint mark is an integral identifier, and while missing mint marks are more famous in earlier decades, any modern example where the mint mark is absent due to a filled die, grease-filled impression, or die abrasion becomes highly desirable, particularly if the rest of the coin is sharply struck and uncirculated, and when such a mint mark anomaly is paired with other errors, its importance multiplies. And speaking of grease-filled dies, this category alone opens the door to some of the most visually dramatic and misunderstood errors, because when grease, debris, or metal shavings clog portions of a die, entire design elements can disappear or appear faint, resulting in missing letters, incomplete dates, or ghost-like portraits. And while minor grease-filled errors are common, extreme cases where major portions of the design are absent are scarce, and when those extreme cases occur on a high-interest date like the year 2000, they attract disproportionate attention, and attention fuels value, especially when combined with pristine condition, and condition is another critical pillar supporting the $40 million narrative, because any coin aspiring to such a valuation must be preserved in extraordinary state, typically mint state with blazing original luster, minimal contact marks, and no evidence of circulation wear. And while billions of 2000 D cents were struck, the vast majority entered circulation immediately, suffering wear, corrosion, and damage, which makes the survival of a perfect error coin increasingly unlikely. And rarity is not just about how many were made but about how many survived in top condition. And this concept becomes even more powerful when we consider dramatic striking errors such as off-center strikes, broad strikes, and misaligned dies, because these errors occur when the planchet is not properly seated during striking, resulting in coins where the design is shifted, stretched, or expanded beyond the normal rim. And while minor off-center strikes are not uncommon, extreme examples that retain full date and mint mark while displaying dramatic misalignment are highly prized. And if such an error occurred on a 2000 D cent and somehow escaped circulation in flawless condition, it would stand out instantly even among seasoned collectors. And then there are multiple strike errors, where a coin is struck more than once without being ejected, sometimes with rotation between strikes, creating overlapping images that look chaotic and surreal. And these coins are often one of a kind or extremely limited because the circumstances required for their creation are rare and unpredictable. And unpredictability is a powerful value driver because it eliminates the possibility of replication. And no discussion of high-value modern cents would be complete without addressing die cracks, die breaks, and retained cuds, because these errors represent physical failures of the die itself under immense pressure. And when a die begins to crack, it leaves raised lines on the coin, and as the crack grows, chunks of the die can break away, resulting in missing sections of the design replaced by raised blobs of metal. And while small die cracks are relatively common, massive retained cuts that dramatically alter Lincoln's portrait, the date, or the lettering are rare, and if such a die failure occurred briefly before the die was retired, producing only a handful of coins, those coins would become legendary, especially if one survived in perfect condition, and the year 2000 adds another layer of intrigue because of its symbolic significance. As coins from millennium years often carry enhanced collector interest simply because of their date, and this psychological factor should not be underestimated because collectors are not purely rational actors, they are storytellers, historians, and sometimes dreamers, and a coin from the year 2000 that embodies a perfect storm of errors becomes a tangible symbol of transition, uncertainty, and human imperfection at the dawn of a new era, and symbolism can elevate value beyond technical rarity, and beyond physical errors there are theoretical possibilities that continue to fuel speculation, such as undocumented experimental strikes, test dies, or prototype planchets that were never meant to leave the mint, because history has shown that the mint's official records do not always capture every experiment or anomaly, and occasionally coins surface decades later that challenge established narratives, forcing historians to revise their understanding, and when such a coin emerges, its value is not measured in guides or auction results, but in its impact on knowledge itself, and knowledge-correcting artifacts often command extraordinary sums because they are irreplaceable. And this is where the $40 million valuation enters the conversation, not as a typical market price but as a reflection of what the right buyer might pay for the right coin under the right circumstances, particularly in a private sale where competition among elite collectors or institutions drives prices beyond public benchmarks. And it is important to understand that numismatic value is not static, it evolves with discovery, authentication, and narrative. And what seems impossible today can become reality tomorrow when a previously unknown specimen is confirmed, and the modern era has already provided examples of astonishing valuations for coins once thought ordinary, reminding us that rarity is not always obvious at first glance, and the 2000 D cent embodies this lesson perfectly, because millions of people have handled it without noticing anything unusual, yet the possibility remains that somewhere, perhaps in an old roll, a forgotten collection, or a misplaced box, lies a specimen with a unique combination of errors so extreme that it defies conventional pricing, and this possibility keeps collectors searching, examining, and learning, which is the lifeblood of the hobby, and the excitement surrounding the 2000 D cent is amplified by modern technology, because high-resolution imaging, digital microscopes, and advanced metallurgical testing allow collectors to identify and verify errors with unprecedented precision, uncovering details that were invisible to earlier generations. And as technology improves, the chances of discovering extraordinary anomalies increase, not because more errors were made, but because we are better equipped to recognize them. And every new discovery reinforces the idea that the story is not finished, that there is still more to learn, and this sense of ongoing mystery sustains the narrative of extreme value. And it is also worth acknowledging the role of media, social platforms, and viral storytelling in shaping perceptions. Because when a coin is discussed in terms of millions, it captures imagination far beyond the collector community, drawing in new enthusiasts and amplifying demand. And demand is a critical component of value, especially when supply is effectively non-existent. And while skeptics rightly point out that no publicly recorded sale has confirmed a $40 million 2000 D cent, history teaches us that the most significant transactions often occur privately, quietly, and without public disclosure, particularly when buyers wish to protect their privacy or avoid market disruption, and thus the absence of a public sale does not invalidate the possibility, it simply underscores the speculative nature of the discussion, and speculation has always been part of numismatics, driving exploration, debate, and discovery. And as we reflect on the errors, mistakes, and possibilities that make the 2001 cent such a captivating subject. From double dies and off-metal strikes to dramatic die failures, missing mint marks, and experimental anomalies, we see that its legendary $40 million valuation is not rooted in a single factor but in the convergence of many, combined with historical context, condition rarity, symbolic significance, and human fascination with imperfection. And this is what transforms a simple cent into a potential treasure, reminding us that value is not inherent in metal alone, but in story, rarity, and meaning. And as long as collectors continue to look closely, question assumptions, and appreciate the unexpected, the legend of the $40 million $2,000 D1 cent will continue to inspire curiosity and hope, proving once again that sometimes the greatest treasures are hiding in the smallest places, waiting patiently to be discovered by someone willing to look just a little closer. Next, 1984 1 cent USA coin. Thank you so much for joining today, whether you're a longtime collector, a casual coin roll hunter, or someone who simply loves stories where everyday objects turn into extraordinary treasures. Because today we're exploring one of the most fascinating and talked about legends in modern American numismatics. The idea that a 1984 1 cent coin could be worth as much as $35 million due to a remarkable convergence of minting errors, production mistakes, historical circumstances, and near-mythical possibilities that continue to fuel speculation, debate, and excitement across the collecting world. And while no officially documented public sale has yet confirmed that exact valuation, understanding how such a figure could even be imagined requires a deep dive into how coins are made, how mistakes happen, how rarity is defined, and why certain errors transform an otherwise ordinary penny into something that collectors dream about for decades. Because at first glance the 1984 1 cent seems utterly unremarkable, struck in massive quantities during a time when the U.S. Mint was producing billions of coins each year, yet it is precisely that scale of production, combined with technological transitions, human oversight, and mechanical limitations, that creates the environment where extraordinary errors can slip through unnoticed. And the 1980s were a particularly important era for U.S. coinage, because the mint was still adapting to the copper-plated zinc composition introduced in 1982, a major change that altered how planchets behaved under striking pressure, how dies wore down, and how quality control had to respond. And in 1984 the Philadelphia and Denver mints were both operating at extremely high output levels, using dies that were pushed to their limits and machinery that had to balance speed with precision. And when speed wins over precision, errors follow. And this is where the foundation for the $35 million speculation begins, because one of the most famous and well-documented errors associated with the 1984 1 cent is the doubled ear variety, where Lincoln's ear appears doubled due to a doubled die obverse. And while known examples of this error already command significant premiums, the idea of a $35 million coin hinges on the possibility of an even more extreme, perhaps undiscovered, doubled die that goes far beyond the known variety, one where the doubling affects not only the ear but the entire portrait, the date, and the inscriptions with dramatic, unmistakable separation that can only occur during the hubbing process when dies receive multiple misaligned impressions, and if such a die were used even briefly before being retired or destroyed, it could have produced a tiny number of coins with visual characteristics so bold and so unprecedented that they would instantly become the most dramatic double die since ever found, surpassing even the legendary 1955 double die in both clarity and rarity. And rarity multiplied by demand is what drives value into the millions. But that alone still doesn't reach 35 million. So collectors and theorists look deeper into what else could elevate a 1984 cent into that stratosphere. And one of the most compelling possibilities is an off-metal strike. Because if a 1984 1 cent were struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination, such as a copper nickel dime planchet, a foreign coin blank, or an experimental alloy that was never officially released, the coin would immediately become a unique or near-unique mint error, and off-metal errors are among the most coveted in numismatics because they represent a clear and undeniable failure in the minting process, especially when the wrong planchet is of a significantly different composition or weight. And in the early 1980s, the mint was actively testing materials, refining plating techniques, and experimenting with bonding processes for copper-plated zinc, which introduces the possibility, however remote, that a small batch of experimental planchets could have been inadvertently mixed into regular production, and if a 1984 cent were proven through metallurgical analysis to be struck on an undocumented experimental alloy, that coin would instantly transcend the category of error coin and enter the realm of pattern or transitional pieces, which are often considered the crown jewels of any collection. And then there's the possibility of a wrong year or wrong design mule error, where dies from different years or denominations are paired together, creating a coin that should never exist. And while mules are rare in U.S. coinage, they do occur, and a 1984 cent struck with a mismatched reverse or an incompatible die pairing would be among the most important modern mules ever discovered, especially if only one example is known, because uniqueness is the ultimate multiplier in value, and the idea of a one-of-one 1984 cent is what keeps collectors searching, because when a coin is truly unique, its value is limited only by what the most determined buyer is willing to pay, and that's where numbers like $35 million enter the conversation, not as a guaranteed price, but as a reflection of theoretical demand among elite collectors, museums, and investors who compete for singular artifacts, and beyond off-metal and mule errors. There's also the concept of dramatic die breaks and retained cuds, which occur when a die begins to fail and pieces of it break away or crack, leaving raised blobs or shapes on the struck coins. And while minor die cracks are common, a massive retained cud that dramatically alters Lincoln's portrait or obliterates part of the design, while still retaining structural integrity, would be extraordinary, especially if it occurred on a fresh strike with full detail elsewhere, because such errors capture the moment of mechanical failure frozen in metal. And when combined with other errors on the same coin, such as doubling or off-center strikes, the value increases exponentially rather than linearly, and this compounding effect is crucial to understanding how a penny could ever be discussed in eight-figure terms, because the market doesn't simply add premiums for each error, it multiplies them based on how unlikely the combination is. And then there's the possibility of a double strike or triple strike error, where a coin is struck more than once, sometimes with rotation or misalignment between strikes, creating overlapping images that are visually striking and extremely rare when severe. And if a 1984 cent were double struck off-center with significant rotation and still retained readable design elements, it would already be highly valuable. But if that same coin also exhibited a double die or off-metal composition, it would enter uncharted territory in terms of desirability, and condition plays an equally important role, because even the rarest error loses much of its appeal if it is heavily worn, damaged, or corroded, whereas a coin preserved in near-perfect mint state, with full original luster, sharp strike, and no post-mint damage, becomes exponentially more valuable. And the idea of a $35 million 1984 cent assumes a specimen that has survived in extraordinary condition, perhaps discovered in an original mint-sealed bag, a forgotten collection, or a hoard that was never circulated, because pristine condition not only enhances visual appeal but also signals authenticity and careful preservation, which are essential when dealing with values this high. And authentication is another key piece of the puzzle, because any coin claimed to be worth millions must withstand intense scrutiny from professional grading services, metallurgists, historians, and independent experts, and a coin that passes this scrutiny gains legitimacy, which in turn fuels market confidence and drives bidding competition, and provenance adds yet another layer, because a documented history of ownership, especially one that traces the coin back to the year of issue or to an original mint source, significantly enhances credibility and desirability, transforming the coin from a curiosity into a historical artifact. And beyond the physical and technical aspects, there's also the cultural and psychological dimension of value, because the Lincoln cent is one of the most collected coins in the world, familiar to nearly every American, and that familiarity creates a powerful emotional connection, making the idea of an ultra-valuable penny especially compelling, because it represents the ultimate underdog story. The notion that something so common and overlooked could secretly be worth a fortune, and this narrative fuels media attention, public fascination, and collector enthusiasm, all of which contribute to value by expanding the pool of potential buyers. And when a coin captures the public imagination, it transcends the hobby and enters popular culture, which can dramatically influence price, as seen with other famous coins whose stories have become legends. And the 1984 cent also benefits from being modern enough that new discoveries are still plausible, because unlike 19th century coins that have been studied exhaustively for generations, modern issues are still being examined with new technology, new research methods, and fresh eyes, and it is not unheard of for major varieties to be discovered decades after a coin's release, especially when production numbers are enormous and quality control records are incomplete or lost, and the U.S. Mint itself has acknowledged that not all errors were documented, especially during periods of high output, which leaves the door open for the existence of extraordinary anomalies that simply haven't surfaced yet. And the $35 million figure, while speculative, reflects the upper bound of what could happen if such an anomaly were discovered and brought to market under the right conditions, including competitive bidding among wealthy collectors who specialize in unique pieces, institutional buyers who view rare coins as alternative investments, and museums that seek to acquire historically significant artifacts. And when multiple parties with deep resources compete for a single object, prices can reach levels that seem unbelievable until they happen, and history has shown that coins once thought to be worth thousands can later sell for millions as new information, new buyers, and new narratives emerge. And that's why the idea of a $35,001,984 cent persists, not as a promise but as a possibility rooted in how value is created at the highest levels of numismatics, where rarity, condition, authenticity, historical significance, and storytelling intersect. And even if such a coin never appears, the discussion itself serves an important purpose by encouraging collectors to learn more, look closer, and appreciate the complexity of coin production and error formation, because every known variety began as an unknown curiosity until someone noticed something different. And the next great discovery could be sitting in a roll, a drawer, or a collection right now, unnoticed, simply because no one has taken the time to look closely enough. And that sense of possibility is what keeps the hobby alive and exciting, reminding us that even in an age of digital transactions and virtual assets, a small copper-colored coin can still spark imagination, curiosity, and dreams of discovery. And whether the 1984 1 cent ever truly reaches a $35 million valuation or remains a fascinating what-if, its story underscores a fundamental truth of collecting: that value is not just about money, it's about rarity, history, mystery, and the human desire to find meaning and wonder in the objects we encounter every day. And that's why people continue to search, study, and speculate, because the next legendary coin doesn't announce itself, it waits quietly until someone recognizes what makes it extraordinary. Last 1996 D1 cent USA coin. Thank you so much for joining me today, because once again, we are stepping into the fascinating and sometimes unbelievable world of American coins, where the smallest denomination can hide the biggest secrets. And today's story centers around a coin that most people have spent without a second thought: the 1996 D1 cent. A humble Lincoln penny from the Denver Mint that circulated widely during the mid-1990s. A time remembered for economic growth, technological expansion, and massive coin production. Yet beneath that familiar copper-plated surface lies a combination of errors, minting mistakes, transitional possibilities, and historical circumstances that have fueled intense speculation and fascination among collectors, leading to discussions that place the potential value of a truly extraordinary example as high as $53 million. A figure that seems almost impossible until you begin to understand how numismatic value is created, amplified, and sometimes transformed into legend. Because the story of the 1996 D1 cent is not just about metal and machinery, but about human imperfection, industrial pressure, unnoticed anomalies, and the enduring appeal of rarity. And to appreciate why this coin has captured so much attention, we must first set the stage by understanding the era in which it was produced. Because the mid-1990s represented a period of enormous output for the United States Mint, particularly for Lincoln cents, which were produced in the billions to meet everyday circulation demands, and the Denver Mint played a central role in this effort, running presses continuously, often prioritizing speed and volume over microscopic perfection, and it is precisely under such conditions that rare and dramatic errors are most likely to occur. Not because workers were careless, but because even the most advanced systems are vulnerable when pushed to their limits, and the 1996 D-cent emerged from this environment, carrying with it the potential for mistakes that could slip past quality control and enter circulation unnoticed, waiting patiently for decades until someone with a trained eye or a bit of luck discovers something extraordinary. And one of the most important error categories associated with the 1996 D1 cent is the double die error, a phenomenon that occurs during the die creation process, when the hub impresses the design onto the die more than once at slightly different angles or positions, resulting in true hub doubling that appears as rounded, clearly separated doubling on design elements, and this is fundamentally different from machine doubling, which is flat and shelf-like and adds little value. And for the 1996 D-cent, the most exciting possibilities involve dramatic doubling on the date, the word liberty, Lincoln's profile, and the motto "In God We Trust." Because strong doubling in these areas is immediately visible and highly sought after, and when such doubling is bold and consistent across multiple elements, it confirms a genuine double die, which is one of the most respected and valuable categories of mint errors. And while some double dies are known and cataloged, the truly extreme examples are the ones that ignite multi-million-dollar discussions, especially when they are discovered late, suggesting that very few examples exist, and rarity is the cornerstone of value. And when rarity intersects with visual impact and historical intrigue, prices can escalate dramatically. And beyond double dies, the 1996 D-cent sits within a broader context of planchet and metal-related possibilities, because by the mid-1990s, the mint was heavily reliant on copper-plated zinc planchets, a composition that introduced its own set of vulnerabilities and error types, including plating defects, exposed zinc cores, improper bonding, and uneven thickness. And while minor plating issues are common and usually inexpensive, extreme plating errors were large. Sections of copper are missing, blistered, or improperly fused can create dramatic visual effects that are rare and highly collectible, and if such an extreme plating error were combined with other anomalies like doubling or misalignment, the resulting coin would be far more than the sum of its parts, because stacked errors exponentially increase desirability. And then there is the possibility of off-metal strikes, a category that has produced some of the most valuable modern coins ever discovered, because if a 1996 D-cent were struck on a planchet intended for another denomination, such as a dime, a foreign coin, or an experimental blank, the result would be a coin with incorrect weight, thickness, and sound, immediately identifiable through testing, and confirmed off-metal errors from modern years are exceptionally rare because of improved planchet handling systems, which means that any genuine example would represent a significant failure in controls, and failures of that magnitude tend to produce coins that are highly prized not only by collectors but by institutions. because they reveal gaps in systems thought to be nearly foolproof. And if a 1996 D-cent were proven to be struck on an experimental alloy or transitional planchet not officially documented, it would become a history-correcting artifact. A coin that challenges what we think we know about mint operations during that era. And such artifacts often command extraordinary valuations because they cannot be replaced or replicated. And beyond metal composition, the striking process itself introduces a wide range of potential errors that play a major role in the $53 million narrative, including off-center strikes where the planchet was not properly seated, resulting in a coin where the design is dramatically shifted toward one edge. And while minor off-center strikes are relatively common, extreme examples that still retain the full date and mint mark are rare and highly valuable, especially when preserved in mint state condition. And condition is critical because even the most spectacular error loses much of its appeal if it is heavily worn, scratched, or damaged. And any coin discussed in 8-figure terms is imagined as being in extraordinary state of preservation, with sharp details, original luster, and minimal contact marks. A coin that somehow escaped circulation entirely despite being produced for everyday use. And such survival stories border on miraculous, adding another layer of intrigue. And then there are broad strikes, where the collar that normally restrains the planchet during striking fails, allowing the metal to spread outward, producing a coin with an expanded diameter and distorted design. And while some broad strikes are modest, extreme examples can look almost melted or stretched, and when paired with other errors, they become exceptionally rare. And multiple strike errors represent another fascinating category, because they occur when a coin is struck more than once without being ejected, sometimes with rotation or misalignment between strikes, resulting in overlapping or rotated images that look chaotic and almost artistic. And these coins are often one of a kind or extremely limited because the precise circumstances required for their creation are unpredictable. And unpredictability is a powerful driver of value because it ensures that even if billions of coins were struck, only a handful could ever exhibit such an error. And no discussion of high-value error coins would be complete without addressing die cracks, die breaks, and retained cuds, because these errors represent physical failures of the die itself under immense pressure, and when a die begins to crack, it leaves raised lines on the coin, and as the crack grows, pieces of the die can break away, resulting in missing sections of the design replaced by raised blobs of metal. And while small die cracks are relatively common, massive retained cuds that dramatically alter Lincoln's portrait, the date, or the lettering are rare. And if such a dramatic die failure occurred briefly before the die was retired, producing only a few coins, those coins would instantly become legendary. And if one of those coins happened to be a 1996 D-cent preserved in pristine condition, its value would be driven not by price guides, but by competition among elite buyers. And the year 1996 itself adds another layer of interest because it was a period of stability before major design changes, making coins from that time feel both modern and historical, and this dual identity attracts a wide range of collectors, from those who focus on classic issues to those interested in modern errors, and psychological factors like nostalgia, symbolism, and personal memory play a significant role in shaping demand. Because many people remember the 90s vividly, and a coin from that era that carries a dramatic story resonates emotionally, and emotion is a powerful force in markets. And beyond documented error types, there are theoretical possibilities that continue to fuel speculation, such as undocumented test strikes, prototype dies, or experimental planchets that were never meant to leave the mint, because history has shown that official records do not always capture every experiment or anomaly, and occasionally coins surface decades later that force historians to revise their understanding. And when such a coin emerges, its value is determined not by precedent, but by its impact on knowledge, and knowledge-altering artifacts often command extraordinary sums because they are unique and irreplaceable. And this is where the $53 million valuation enters the conversation, not as a confirmed sale price, but as an expression of what the right buyer might be willing to pay for the right coin under the right circumstances, particularly in a private transaction where discretion, prestige, and legacy matter as much as money. And it is important to understand that numismatic value is not fixed. It evolves with discovery, authentication, and narrative. And what seems impossible today can become reality tomorrow when a previously unknown specimen is verified, and the modern era has already produced examples of astonishing valuations for coins once thought ordinary, reminding us that rarity is not always obvious at first glance. And the 1996 cent embodies this lesson perfectly, because billions were struck, yet the possibility remains that somewhere, perhaps in an old roll, a forgotten collection, or a box tucked away in a drawer, lies a specimen with a unique combination of errors so extreme that it defies conventional pricing. And this possibility keeps collectors searching, learning, and sharing information, which is the lifeblood of the hobby. And modern technology amplifies this search, because high-resolution imaging, digital microscopes, and advanced metallurgical testing allow collectors to identify and verify errors with unprecedented precision, revealing details invisible to earlier generations. And as technology improves, the chances of discovering extraordinary anomalies increase, not because more errors were made, but because we are better equipped to recognize them. And every new discovery reinforces the idea that the story is not finished, that there is still more to uncover. And this sense of ongoing mystery sustains the legend of the 1996 1 cent. And media and online platforms play a role as well, because when a coin is discussed in terms of millions, it captures public imagination, drawing new people into the hobby and amplifying demand. And demand is a critical component of value, especially when supply is effectively non-existent. And while skeptics rightly note that no publicly recorded sale has confirmed a $53,001,996 cent, history shows that the most significant transactions often occur privately, quietly, and without disclosure, particularly when buyers wish to avoid attention or market disruption. And thus the absence of a public sale does not invalidate the possibility. It simply highlights the speculative nature of the discussion, and speculation has always been part of numismatics, driving exploration, debate, and discovery. And as we reflect on the errors, mistakes, and possibilities that surround the 1996 1 cent, from doubled dies and off-metal strikes to dramatic die failures, plating anomalies, and experimental mysteries, we see that its legendary valuation is not rooted in a single factor, but in a convergence of many, combined with historical context, condition rarity, symbolic resonance, and human fascination with imperfection. And this convergence is what transforms a simple penny into a potential treasure, reminding us that value is not inherent in metal alone, but in story, rarity, and meaning. And as long as collectors continue to look closely, question assumptions, and appreciate the unexpected, the legend of the $53,001,996 1 cent will continue to grow, inspiring curiosity, hope, and the belief that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries are hiding in the most ordinary places, waiting patiently for someone willing to look just a little closer.